Good morning, everyone. A few announcements before we begin. Immediately after the service, we're having cottage meetings up in 219, which is a little hard to find. So it's on the second floor above Elliott Hall. Now, you can get it by going this way up these stairs. That would be a mistake. It's a labyrinth to try to make your way because there's like two buildings that squeeze into one. Don't do that. There is another set of stairs that is right outside Elliott Hall, right in the corner. If you take those up and you turn the corner, it's staring you right in the face. That's the way to go. So what is a cottage meeting? It's the search committee is putting together these for the whole month. Meetings after the 9 o'clock service and after the 11 o'clock service. There's room for 15 people each time. And you can just go in and talk to them, share what you're looking for, what's been meaningful to you, what you would like to see the church do in the future. And they'll sort of take this and incorporate it in their process for finding the new minister. So please, please, please grab a cup of coffee and head on up. The auction is taking place on October 22nd. The auction page is live on our website. You can get tickets on there. You can offer to sponsor the event. You can donate items. I have something up there, a lovely, lovely vegan meal for 4. Huh? Who says I like gourmet style? They're like, oh no, I hate vegan food. It's terrible. It's not. You should buy it and find out how amazing it is. The silent auction starts in a couple weeks. It's actually on that. The adult religious education, we have is that an adult? The costume swap is part of adult religious? It is not. It says so here. Adults are probably welcome also. But it's probably a costume swap on the 9th for people who are children. That's at 12:15. You might see me out there. Who knows? And then, David, we have some decorations in this room.
We do.
What's going on with these banners? I'm not going through that whole thing again. I gave up. Penance. It just sounds so like I've done something wrong. But you're right, I get it. Penance.
You haven't bought your hymnal yet.
Oh, wait. Well, maybe that's just the opportunity. There's an opportunity waiting.
Right.
So tell me what these are about.
This is how many turquoise hymnals we need. Still, in order to stack the pews and get 5 in every pew, this is how many we still need to buy.
5 in every pew.
Yeah.
These people don't like to share, I guess.
That's all right.
Okay. All right. So what happens? Do they take one down and they go to a table?
Take a flag down. Go to a table.
There's a table out here in Elliott Hall where there's a stripe thing. It's called Square, I guess. You slide your card and you pay for it. It's $20 each. You can also use Breeze. And that's how we can stop borrowing the choir's hymnals and we can get our own hymnals.
And you don't even have to pay for them today. We just need your name and number.
Yeah.
And we'll follow up on it. And then I know where you live. So we'll get the book plates. Once we get everyone, then we'll get the book plates printed and we'll have them sing.
And we'll just show up outside the doors. Come sing a song.
Right.
Okay. Lastly, we had a winner at our 9 o'clock service for the person who got their card stamped at our activities fair. And we have another winner for our 11 o'clock service, Christina Dope. Oh. So you got your card stamped all the way. You visited all the tables. Yeah, and there you go. You went. So
thank you.
Yes, worship at the great UU altar of coffee. Right? Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. With that, let us begin our worship with these words from Christian Schmidt. Let us wake up, not just from the Sunday morning exhaustion, from the wish for a few more drowsy minutes in bed. Let us wake up to this world we live in, to its beauty and wonder, and also to its tragedy and pain. We must wake up to this reality that not all in our world have what we do, however much or little that is. We must wake up to the idea that our wholeness, our lives, are only as complete as the lives of those around us, of those we are inextricably tied to in this great web of mutuality of which we are all a part. And we must stay woke. In the words of our friends and colleagues involved with the Black Lives Matter movement, working every day for racial justice in this country, let us wake up. Let us stay awake. Let us stay woke. And now, let us worship together. Please join in our first hymn, number 128. It's in the gray hymnal, For All That Is Our Lives.
Last spring, I got a new app on my phone. It's a bird identification app, Merlin. Anybody have it here? Yeah, it is so cool. Your phone you just hit record, and it tells you what bird it is that you're listening to. So that's a pretty cool thing. I'm very impressed by it. So I got this app, and then I started doing this. And soon I was hitting record, and I wasn't really looking at the phone to see what bird it is. I was trying to guess, is this a lesser goldfinch, or a song swallow, or a house finch? I'm sure those are probably pretty easy distinctions for the birders out there, but I was just beginning to open my ears to sound, just beginning to listen. What would it be like if we could download an app that would allow us to interpret humans the same way? To really listen to the words, not just the words, but the meaning behind them. I think I'd call it I Hear You, with the capital U. And that's an app that I would pay for, because listening is hard. So much is going on in a conversation that the app would have to be able to slow things down and to be able to attend to all the variables, the verbal and nonverbal things that are happening. My son Nathan works in San Francisco as a computer scientist. He talks about programs and routers and security protocols with multiple acronyms that I can't possibly comprehend. I try, but it's hard. Sometimes I do better than others, but I have to check with him often and say, is this what you mean? Or is this like the thing we talked about 3 months ago? And he frequently has to say, not really, Mom. So I'm certain that sometimes he feels like I'm not listening to him. And he would be right. Sometimes my mind starts to wander. I start to think about my response, about how I can relate to what he's telling me. And sometimes, honestly, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner. My hope is that he knows that I can't really understand all his acronyms and that he appreciates my effort. The app could tell me if that was true. Another handy feature of the I Hear You app could be a bias indicator. This could alert us to the filters that we're using that get in the way of hearing the actual message instead of what we think the message was. When I first spoke with Reverend Ian about being a lay minister, he explained that I'd be giving homilies. Right away, I was reactive. In Catholicism, a homily is what the priest says before the creed and the communion, and it's his interpretation of the gospel. There was no way I wanted to read a homily. But instead, I recognized that I was filtering this through Catholicism instead of listening to what Ian really had in mind. And I'm really glad that I listened. In a similar way, you might hear the word God and feel like it's a push toward Christianity. This bias indicator feature might be especially useful for Unitarians. It would also be helpful if the I Hear You told us something about the communication style of the person that we're talking to. Not all people want the same things at the same time. I remember it being really helpful to learn about conflict styles when I was in college, especially in my relationship with my husband, who was then my boyfriend. Our typical way of doing conflict was for me to engage in lengthy monologues about my feelings, and for him to say nothing. And I really mean nothing. We learned that he needed time to think things over, to think through his options, to look at scenarios, while I needed him to respond right away to let me know that he was listening. Once we were aware of these differences in styles, we were able to figure out how to do conflict with a lot less hurt on both sides. What have you learned about listening in your relationships? What makes listening hard for you? I find that I need to quiet parts of my brain to really be there with someone, to hear them, to see them. I can't rehearse my response or launch into problem-solving mode. I just need to sit with them. I need to look them in the eye I need to follow their lead and ask them what they need from me. It is so incredibly powerful to have someone really listen to you. I think back to phone calls with my mother about my latest worry, like how my toddler daughter wouldn't eat a single vegetable. And she'd listen patiently. "I'm sorry, Nancy. I'm sure you'll know the right thing to do." Her presence, even over a long-distance phone call, and her simple words would help me get through. She didn't tell me about her experience with picky eaters, though I know she had them. She didn't try to solve my problems. She listened to me, and I felt loved and cared for and understood. Not only is listening hard, but it can be exhausting. My mother, whom I lost last year, she loved birds. She'd spend her evenings on the porch with a glass of wine, taking a break from her children, and listening to the birdsong. I think that sometimes she just needed that time to herself and that break so that she could be a better listener. Listening to birds is also helping me be a better listener. It's helping me to fine-tune my focus so I can really hear what's being said. I'm still waiting for the I Hear You app, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Daniel Ladinsky writes, "A hunting party sometimes has a greater chance of flushing love and God out into the open than a warrior all alone." We know, regardless of the task, the chances of us succeeding are greater when we work as a group or a team, whether it's business or sports or philanthropy. People get more done as a team than if the same number of people tried to do it individually. And while we've all had some experience working with some lousy teams that really test the limits of our patience, leaving us wondering if this work has any value, many of us also know what it's like to work with a really great team, where each participant is working with a singular focus to bring about a common goal. And this can feel rewarding, exciting, even life-giving. This is just a gift to be a part of. But rarely, if ever, do we talk about engaging in spiritual practice in a way that sees the other person's spiritual help and development as pivotal to my health and development. And I don't want to be confusing. There are many religious communities out there that are invested in a powerful sense of social cohesion, right? A rallying around a singular and unifying set of beliefs. And this is not what I'm talking about. The request from these communities is for a solidarity and an adherence to a set of truths that are set apart from our personal experience, and we must align ourselves to that. But I'm talking about something else, something that feels more akin to being on a pilgrimage. You can walk a pilgrimage on your own, and some of the insight and value comes from that personal solitude. But it's so much easier to walk a pilgrimage when you share the road with others. It's so much easier to sit retreat if the people sitting next to you are there inspiring you to stay true to the reason that you came. This is why the Buddha called the congregation one of the 3 jewels of Buddhism. But the idea of sharing a spiritual journey flies in the face of most contemporary religious practices. There's this myth of individualism that calls through our culture, one that tells me that I can be my own man, right? That I am responsible for my life, that I can have a personal, one-to-one relationship with God, that salvation is uniquely dependent on my thoughts and behaviors. As you use, on the surface anyway, we, for the most part, reject this. However, given our ambiguous and often fraught relationship with the divine, we have at times assumed a corresponding myth, one that sounds something like, a person can believe whatever they want. And not only do I not need to rely on anyone else for spiritual development, nobody has the authority to tell me that my theology is misguided because I can build my own theology. Some of this, in part, comes from the recovery process that we've taken up in our congregations due to the high level of spiritual trauma that many people have experienced. And so it's really important work. But some of it is also just entitlement. We may not believe that the American dream is real for everyone, but it is for us. We succeeded, which oddly leaves us at a disadvantage when it comes to spiritual development. Because the truth is, for most of us, the best way to attain spiritual insight is by helping each other, by being invested in one another, not as charity, but as partners. What would our church look like if we began to explore the spirituality of interdependence, the spirituality of our interwovenness? A spirituality that invites us to discern how my spiritual experience is dependent on your spiritual experience. And if I'm interested in cultivating my relationship with the divine, then it behooves me to help you cultivate your relationship with the divine. Not in a coercive way, but in a partnership. How might our community change if our spiritual work, what we do together, were designed around our mutual transformation? None of us really believe that individual salvation is real, right? That I am going to heaven because I'm so great. And David, well, so sad. So sad. Right? We don't believe that because it's not true. But, where we tend to fall is either all of us make it or none of us do. We may experience life distinctly, but we cannot be separated from one another. And it's time that our spiritual practices reflected that. As you use, so many of us are seeking the path one by one, lonely pilgrims trying to flush love and God out into the open all by ourselves. But an intimacy greater than the one we experience in the individualistic world is available to us if we begin to see that sacredness is indivisible and we begin to cultivate practices that prioritize this. I may be responsible for my own life and my disciplines, but I need you to awaken so I can awaken. I need you so that I might become who I'm meant to become. And for you, I am so grateful. Amen.
Hi, I'm Kim Grob, and my volunteer job this year for our church and for the next 3 years is working for you on the Board of Trustees. Reverend Ian asked each of us on the board to think about why we're doing this. Why give up weekends and evenings to be a steward for this church? Why pledge? Why should anyone in this congregation invest their precious time and hard-earned money here? Especially when everyone in every organization seems to want a piece of us. So this is my why. Why I'm a steward. Because I was tired, and a man took my baby so I could sit alone in a pew for 1 blessed hour. Because children needed their wings fastened for the holiday pageant, and this was something I could do. Because of the old apple tree in the corner of the church playground, where my kids perched every Sunday for years. Because I walked in this building and heard someone speaking a language that I understood. Because I stayed in this building and someone taught me an all-new language. Because I love thinkers and rabble-rousers and nonconformists. Because every September, when the kids of this church parade into the sanctuary, lined up from babes in arms to teens with piercings, I hear the familiar opening bars to enter, rejoice, and come in, and every time it makes me cry. Because I had a place to cry when the Twin Towers fell, and when my father died, and when women lost their right to choose. Because a little owl taught my teens how to use condoms, like exactly how, when the Salt Lake School District wouldn't. Because no one here is going to tell me who I can love, who my children can love, or who my friends can love. Because everyone here will love me for who I am, messy, imperfect, and filled with more questions than answers. Because Wiccans and Buddhists and mystics and atheists all sit together in these pews. Because we worship in temples beyond these pews, in our mountains and forests and deserts, and our great Salt Lake. Because Rumi says there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And I believe there are just as many ways to rise up and embrace this church. Because once I'd learned to set boundaries and say no, I relearned the joy of saying yes. Because 20 years ago, I walked into a building and found a home. And because home is worth protecting, no matter the cost.
The ushers will now come forward to accept the offertory, I think. Are there any ushers? It's becoming a theme. Oh, hello. Wonderful. And if you would rather give online, you can. There's a QR code, and you can just scan your phone, and it'll connect you to our giving page online. Thank you so much.
This past Tuesday night, at our first Teams night of the year, I spent some time with our caring team, which has a new name. Compassion in Action. Isn't this great? It's really great. I love it. Now, This is something that confuses people sometimes, so I'm just going to take a moment to explain. There's sort of two levels, right, of caring. There's a big email list, which we hope all of you will sign up for, which is people who are willing to send a card to someone or make someone a meal, maybe give someone a ride to the doctor. Then there's this smaller group, the Compassion in Action team, which comes together on Teams Night, and they're talking about even more unique ways to show caring in our community. And we're hoping even to get this team some specialized training in pastoral care. So 2 levels, does that all make sense? Okay, great. Now, like all of our teams, there are some problems that the Compassion in Action team is working through. One problem is that in times past, we had as many as 100 people signed up for this big email list, but a lot of you weren't getting the emails. So we're going to change the way that we communicate with you so that hopefully everyone is getting the messages the way that we want. This is a fixable problem, right? We can handle this. We've also talked through some problems that are a little stickier to solve. Problems that don't stem from logistics, but from our culture. And sometimes they're harder to talk about because they can be more tender. Often we come to Unitarian Universalism from other faith traditions, where the expectations around caring might be different. In some traditions, for example, someone might show up with a casserole and they might bring a side dish of surveillance. Right? Sister, I hadn't seen you at Sunday meeting lately. Are you still all right with the Lord? I'm familiar with that method. Can make you want to order a pizza and just stay in your house till you feel better. Then there are parents like me who will accept your casserole as long as you set it on the porch step, ring the doorbell, and then hightail it out of there. Because life doesn't stop when we're sick, right? Probably everybody else in the house is sick and grumpy and smelly. There's 3 loads of laundry piled up on the couch, so there's nowhere for you to sit if you come in anyway. There's a funny smell in the kitchen, and there might be a funny smell in whatever raggedy clothes I wear when I show up to the door, and I really just can't imagine another human being seeing me like this. So you know what? Thanks anyway, I'll just order a pizza too. Now there's another dynamic that sometimes shows up in UU churches, which is a little harder to dig out. And that's the people who feel like it's really improper to ask for help or to accept help. And I wonder about that. Maybe we just come by it honest. After all, we are the spiritual heirs of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the sage of Concord, who impressed the concept of self-reliance onto a young America just coming into its own. And of his protege, Henry David Thoreau, who took to the cabin on Walden Pond alone to live deliberately, living out that self-reliant ethic in hardscrabble solitude. Or maybe, through the windows of Emerson and Thoreau, we can see the lights of our Puritan ancestors shining through. Simplicity, thrift, do-it-yourselfness. Who knows? Or it might be something about our relationship to the wider culture. Unitarian Universalists tend to be whiter, wealthier, and better educated than America on average. Now, any one of us might not have all 3, but all 3 are concentrated in our pews. Wealth, whiteness, and education are characteristics of privilege that often reveal people who don't have to accept help because they can buy it. Insurance, information, healthcare advantages, and more. we might well pause to wonder what the trade-off is. There is privilege in being able to protect oneself from vulnerability, that's true, but we often pay for it with isolation and loneliness. No one can avoid vulnerability forever. Pain, weakness, and death come for us all sooner or later. When it arrives for us, that's when we want to find ourselves in a community that is comfortable with vulnerability, that has seen fragility and weakness many times before and doesn't look away, a community that recognizes the human condition in each of us. Many of us UUs are deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability. We don't want anybody to see us without makeup or ironed clothes. Heck, I don't want anybody to see me without my glasses. We definitely feel uncomfortable with people seeing us getting old, being sick, losing what we have, living with addiction, being bereaved or lonely or afraid. One way that we can approach the topics we don't want to talk about is through stories. There's the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, which are often unexamined and incorrect. And then there's what really happened, or what is really happening. Storytelling is a kinder mirror than documentary history. We find ourselves in the story, and we gently explain to ourselves that what we believe is just that. It's just a belief. It can be challenged. It can be changed. We can adopt a new belief and a new story that leads us to a more expansive and wholehearted place. So let me tell you a story. It's not a UU story, but maybe you've heard it before. It's about a young woman named Kisa Gotami, whose only son has died very young. She's overwhelmed with grief, and she takes the body of her young son to the enlightened Buddha. Kisa Gotami lays the wrecked body at the Buddha's feet and begs him to bring her boy back to life. The Buddha says, "I can do this for you if you will go out into the village and bring me back a mustard seed from the stores of a home that has never been touched by death." The young woman, delirious with grief, walks up and down the streets of the village, knocking on every door, asking whether the family within had been touched by death. "Yes, you remember my mother died last year. Of course you recall my husband. My wife is inside dying as we speak." Kisa goes to every home but cannot find anyone who is not suffering the remembrance of a loss. She went back to the Buddha, took her child, took him home to bury him, understanding at last the universality of death. Had Kisa Gotami lived in 19th century Massachusetts, the Buddha might have sent her around to find a home that had not been touched by tuberculosis. By the late 19th century, 70 to 90% of the urban populations of Europe and North America were infected with the tuberculosis bacillus, and about 80% of the individuals who developed active tuberculosis died from it. Well, we talk a pretty good game about a pandemic these days, don't we? And really, I don't want to make light of COVID-19. Too many people make light of it already. It's a serious disease, but TB was a truly cruel pandemic. Now, in those days, people didn't know about the tuberculosis bacillus, and they often believed that TB was hereditary. The families of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were known to be carriers. Now, What Unitarian Universalist doesn't hear the words self-reliance and think immediately of Mr. Emerson, right? Many of us read Emerson and Thoreau for the first time in high school, and then those of us who become UUs later in life encounter them again as old friends. We are proud to be the religious heirs of the Transcendentalists, who really dreamed American literature and philosophy into being. We forget, or we might not even know, that we are also the religious heirs of tuberculosis. Waldo Emerson's father died at 42 of tuberculosis. He lost 2 of his 4 brothers to TB. He fell in love with Ellen Tucker, who was already quite sick. They had a deeply romantic relationship, even though they knew they likely wouldn't have many years together. It still came as a shock when Ellen died only 2 years into their marriage at the age of 19. Waldo famously exhumed Ellen's body some months after her death, held her decaying in his arms because he had to know for himself what was happening to her. Creepy? Romantic? I don't know. It was the 19th century. They were all doing weird stuff. Waldo remarried, and his second wife, Lydian, was as much an intellectual as he was, but they too experienced loss. Their oldest son, also named Waldo, died at the age of 5, and Emerson was devastated. A friend recalled, "I think I was never more impressed with a human expression of agony than when Mr. Emerson led me into the room where little Waldo lay dead and said only in reply to whatever I could say of sorrow or sympathy, 'Oh, that boy, that boy.'" Henry Thoreau and 2 of his siblings succumbed to tuberculosis. Henry was only 44. Emerson's brief career as a Unitarian minister only lasted 3 years, and as a minister myself, I shudder to think how many of his parishioners he must have buried after they too died of TB. The Ralph Waldo Emerson that we are so proud to remember is the Emerson of such essays as Nature and the Young Americans, of the Oversoul and Self-Reliance, the Emerson who inspired westward expansion for better or worse, the Reverend Emerson who quit the ministry and then took up a seat in the balcony of Old Concord Church so he could heckle the preacher. I love that story. Not that I want y'all to, anyway. But is that the only way to remember him? Why did he leave the ministry? On the surface of it, he left for the same reason many people leave conventional religion. It had gotten tedious, and the church authorities stood on ceremony and dogma. Yes, there was Unitarian dogma back then. Emerson was intellectually dissatisfied with the rut Christianity had fallen into. And remember, at that time, Unitarianism was still solidly Christian. But I think he also realized that conventional religion could not hold all this grief. The religion in which he'd been trained as a minister had completely lost its soul. It was a lot of standing up and sitting down, doing the same things week after week without questioning why. And it came up empty against the banality of real life, so deeply shrouded in illness and death. Emerson wanted what many of us want today. He wanted a religion that had something meaningful to say about life, but also about suffering and death, or he would have no religion at all. Self-reliance was not about refusing help or relying only on yourself. It was about being able to trust your own inner voice to guide you, not relying on dead forms of religion that repeated the same old tired advice and expected you to take it like medicine. Emerson believed in the divine self within, the source of the inherent dignity of each person, a connection with each other and with the universe that no one could take away. That divine self becomes evident through taking refuge not in privilege or separation, but rather through vulnerability and the experience of being held through it. Emerson and Thoreau and Margaret Fuller and Nathaniel Hawthorne and the Alcott family, they all lived very close together, very close to Concord. They walked everywhere. They took up chores in each other's homes and knew each other's families and spent time together and wrote and dreamed together, bound not just by ideas, but by suffering. When the pall of death darkens every door, maybe ideas become more precious. Maybe sharing ideas with the people who show up for you amplifies those ideas, maybe even to the creation of a whole new vision for the nation. I don't know, maybe this is just a story I'm telling myself, but I like this story so much better than the story that says we have to put on a brave face, stiff upper lip, and order a pizza rather than admit how much we're struggling. Now, we don't live in 19th century Concord, so we're going to have to create community differently than they did there and then. The larger our church grows, the less likely it is that we'll know everyone who's a member here, and that's a good thing. But it also means that we have to get comfortable with taking care of people we haven't met. We should be comfortable with sending a card to someone who won't recognize our signature and trust that our connection to them through this church has enough meaning to set it up. We'll have to be okay with showing up with that casserole at the home of someone who will be meeting us for the first time in their pajamas. It's awkward. But we'll embrace it because feeling awkward is so much better than feeling all alone. When you look at pictures of Emerson as an old man, he has a smile on his face. Despite having seen so much death, having lost so many beloveds, having lived so long with inactive tuberculosis himself, he had achieved an inner freedom that still inspires us today. And I've come to believe that what made that freedom possible was this interconnected community, made strong through this shared experience of vulnerability. Ours ought to be a church where it's okay to show up just the way you are and where you'll be accepted the way you are. People who've seen some things, people with stories to tell, people who live with physical and mental illnesses and disabilities, people who are lonely or scared, people facing death, which is all of us really. I want, like Emerson, a religion that has something to say about life, about death, about suffering and vulnerability and presence and comfort and meaning in the face of it all. A religion where the hurting people can come. And we meet them at the door and say, "You look like you're hurting. I'm hurting too. Come on in." I invite you to rise now in body or in spirit. Sing with me. Number 123, Spirit of Life. I'd like you to stay standing just for a moment. And as we close our service today, just take a look around you. Like really turn and look. There are no strangers here. There are no strangers here. Only friends, only neighbors, only other human beings who are vulnerable and in need of our help. Only companions on the journey. As one of my favorite spiritual teachers says, we're all just walking each other home. May it be so.